Welcome to the BCL Podcast. I'm Vishal Krishna. This is our second episode in bringing you wonderful entrepreneurs who are building for India and for the world. Today we're going to explore the world of gallium nitride, and it's an element that goes into your transmitters, defense transmitters. It could go into drones, aerospace, much more. Talking about that and the business and the Make in India kind of business, because the ministers are all saying India doesn't have a deep tech ecosystem. I've been in the business for so long that I know that we have a deep tech ecosystem, but we have to commercialize it. Talking about all these things and much more is Agnit's founder, Dr. Hareesh. Doctor, how are you?
I'm very fine, thank you.
Thank you for coming to this podcast. And like I said, the first question would always be about what does Agnit mean? Agnit, right? Agnit technology, you say?
Agnit.
What does it mean? I Americanized it when we met a few minutes ago, calling it Agnit or something like that.
No, I do that all the time.
What's Agnit?
So Agnit is actually a short form for Advanced Gallium Nitride Semiconductors. So we believe that this is an advanced gallium nitride gallium nitride is an advanced semiconductor material.
Okay.
So we named the company Agnit. Agnit also means limitless, countless, infinite.
In Sanskrit?
Right. So I believe so. That's also helpful because we feel that the use cases for this technology are only growing.
Okay.
Right. So
before we start breaking down the science and trying to tell you guys that the use cases of gallium nitride may be right around you and you won't even know it. We'll get into that in a bit. But I want to start off with a quick thought on, you're a Bangalore boy. You studied in ISC and MS Ramaiah, which is fantastic. Quickly, what did you study? And when did you move into Agnit? Is something I want to know.
Sure. I graduated in 2008 with a bachelor's in ECE and from MS Ramaiah, and then I spent a year working for IBM here. I think that was just about the time that they had offloaded some of their chip design functions to Bangalore for the very first time. So I got a chance to work on IBM's microprocessor design, which was happening here in Bangalore. Then after a year, I was quite bored, so I decided to I gave my entrance exam to IISc, got selected. And since Bangalore has been home, it was a no-brainer. So I moved to IISc in 2009, and until then I thought semiconductors were silicon, and that was
which is
a popular perception anyway, yes. Right? So
you were right. I'm just going to stop you there. Even I thought it's all silicon, but then I realized that there's a whole other ecosystem as well. We'll get into it. Okay, you got into you were actually making chips with IBM.
And
write an exam, get into ISC.
Yeah.
And did gallium nitride come to you just by chance, or you just choose it?
No, it's completely fortuitous. I think I was in an interdisciplinary PhD program. One of my advisors was a material scientist. The other advisor was a semiconductor expert, and they were looking at this new material called gallium nitride. So which I had no clue of. I'd never heard of it before. Right, so this was back in 2009, and then so I started working on it and then developed an interest. It's also interesting because for the first time in a long time, it looked like for certain use cases, gallium nitride might be a better material than even silicon, which at that point was a very revolutionary thing to kind of say, right? And then finally, we've all encountered gallium nitride in various shapes and forms, so I'm happy to talk about it. But in 2014, for example, 3 researchers from Japan actually won the Nobel Prize for their work on developing gallium nitride as a material, mainly for white light LEDs. And so all the LEDs that we have today all have some gallium nitride base in them. Right. So if you remember, for the longest time, consumer electronics would have this red color LEDs, right? Yes. You ever wonder why it was only red color LEDs? It took a long time for us to start seeing green color and blue color LEDs, right? So if you mix red, green and blue, you get white. And so the green LED and the blue LED were realized using gallium nitride as a semiconductor material.
Interesting. So, and the common man should know this because...
Yeah, the common man should know this because, purely because, on an everyday basis, everybody has now transitioned to LED bulbs. So you're all buying gallium nitride based LED bulbs, whether you like it or not.
That's really well said. So that's how it is fortuitous in a way, like you said, because this enabled you to go into a postdoc in the USA. And,
that's correct.
And what was your postdoc on?
So I did 2 postdocs. I first did a postdoc in the UK, where I spent 2 years working on the reliability. Any new semiconductor material, it's one thing to meet certain performance targets. It's always important that the material is made reliable. Any semiconductor components that you realize out of it are made reliable. quite often when electronic systems fails, right? So it's not necessarily the semiconductor that fails. The chip is probably just working fine because it's probably rated to work for about 10 years or so, right? So other things around fail, but generally it's never the chip that fails. In order to develop technology to such a state of maturity, it's very important to look at all these aspects, right? So not just performance, it's also about how reliable some of these semiconductor components are. And anytime you change the base material itself from which you're making components, it's very important to look at reliability. So that's what I did for a couple of years at the UK. Then I spent 2 years in the US as a postdoc as well. So, now I've done 2 postdocs, right? So I thought I was going to have a distinguished academic career, but, life...
So you wanted to become a teacher?
I wanted to be a researcher, right? So that was primarily my interest. But life had other plans.
It's good that we have you on the commercial side of things or an entrepreneurial side of things, which is what India requires. I'll get deeper into that in a bit, but how did Agnit happen?
Yeah, so Agnit happens in a very, we registered the company in 2019. When I say we, there was a group of faculty members at IISc who had been working on gallium nitride since way before I joined. I think work started in 2006, 2007 time frame, right? So as of today, gallium nitride research at IISc is about 17 years old. Right, so we had a significant technology base, and finally in about the year 2019, we said that okay, look, we should really try and commercialize a lot of the IP that we built. Right, otherwise normally we had lots of papers published. We had quite a few patents that we had also kind of established
as individuals,
as individuals as part of IISc, the organization, right? So what we wanted to do was try and take some of these into real world use cases, put them into the hands of a consumer.
Did somebody tell you that, or you just decided one day?
No, we just decided to do that because we felt that it was about time.
Who were the other gentlemen?
So sure, I think we had the company has 7 co-founders, right? So again, fairly diverse group in the sense that, one of them is a material scientist, the other is a semiconductor expert primarily working on radio frequency, the other is a professor who is working on power electronics and reliability, the other is a professor working on process integration, how do you manufacture these things, right? And then, then you had me, then you have another, one of our co-founders used to be the India head of AMD, before that he was India head of applied materials, right? And so he's held a lot of leadership roles across industry. And, one other gentleman whom we had as a co-founder, so he was he was the director of the solid state physics lab. This is the DRDO semiconductor lab in Delhi. And actually that's where gallium nitride research in the country was initiated back again in 2007 or so, sort of time frame.
So it's a great meeting of minds that happened.
Absolutely.
And again, fortuitous, not planned.
No, completely unplanned. We just happened to be in the same place at the same time.
Okay. Once that happens, ladies and gentlemen, I'll just take a couple of minutes to talk about the fact that they've raised a large seed from 314 Capital and Zephyr Peacock. And when you look at these two firms, they are looking for the long run in terms of taking this deep tech company forward. It's very essential, not only for a team to build things, but you also need a good VC or a couple of VCs to be on the cap table so that the journey becomes clear and the roadmap's clear. They also have had IDEX grants. You've had IDEX grants, I'm sure. We'll talk about that. IDEX is the defense grants that are available. It's the government of India's effort to ensure that every component of a defense product is made locally, and we'll talk about that with Dr. Hareesh. So all these things have come together. I know if you open Agnit's website, it's all about IDEX, it's about startup Karnataka, it's Make in India, all those stories come in. Let's take a moment to break it down. Silicon is about computation, it's about experience, right? Everything that we see on a smartphone, on a laptop. But then this is where we need companies like Agnit, because you need transmitters also. Right? And in a war scenario, you need transmitters that are, that are reliable. Let me put it that way. From a person who doesn't understand engineering, I'm putting it that way. But I want you to explain to the consumer, what is the difference between a silicon-based chip and a gallium nitride-based wafer? And how both of them can combine with each other?
Sure. So silicon as a technology does a few things remarkably well. Once upon a time, it used to be the technology that did absolutely everything, right? So all the way from doing logic, memory, to doing, even power handling, which also happens to a fairly large extent today. So gallium nitride as a material, doesn't do too much in the logic or the memory space. What it does is handle power extremely well.
Yes.
Right. So, the applications of this you are seeing around you. So today, most 5G base stations, the power amplifier that's there runs actually on gallium nitride. It's not silicon based anymore. So you went from 2G to 3G to 4G using silicon based solutions. And now for 5G, you're exploring a gallium nitride based power amplifier. Right. So the other major use case that, probably everybody has encountered is, if you have a fast charger for your cell phone today, you've already used the first consumer product which has a gallium nitride based electronic component. So your fast charger is a fast charger because it has gallium nitride based power switches. That's what does the conversion from AC that comes in your mains to DC, which gets stored in the battery. So the earlier technology using silicon, if I can call it that, used to be like slow chargers. So that's how the technology has actually progressed. So it's kind of a step change. So we used to have these 10, 15 watt chargers in a footprint roughly the size that I'm holding up now. And today you can get a 60 watt charger in the same footprint. So the power density has gone up enormously.
So one is the power management as well, in the sense that it doesn't explode. That's the thing, to put it simply from a common man's perspective.
Sure, it's actually capable of handling much higher amounts of power in the same footprint, and therefore giving you a better charging experience. You can charge your phone in 20 minutes today.
Okay.
Once upon a time, you had to leave it overnight, and then so that used to be.
This is fantastic. You're in the defense space for a reason. We'll get in the consumer space, which is where India needs its own gallium nitride, also in a large way production. Where do we begin from a defense use case? I don't know how much you could talk about it, but you can always say that this is what I can't talk about, but let me paint the picture this way. Let's start with transmitters and radars. I think the government will use gallium nitride in these components, right? Let's give them use cases. Where does your market access? They access the gallium nitride for you, but what do they access the technology for?
Sure. So let's maybe take even one step back and talk about the fact that gallium nitride today in any of these defense use cases are primarily going to be, and when I say defense, it's not just defense, it's defense, aerospace, space-based applications. Anytime that you want to transmit a wireless signal today with moderate to high amounts of power, gallium nitride is a better power amplifier solution than anything on the market, right? So that's where the technology is being used. Now, if you start looking into where is it that I'm going to transmit power, it could be things like radars. At the end of the day, if you think about a radar, you have an antenna array. Beyond that, you have a bunch of power amplifiers. Beyond that, you have a bunch of back-end systems as well. So you have the entire radio front end. And so you're transmitting a radio signal, you're getting a ping, let's say, from an aircraft, and then you're able to triangulate where it's going and how fast, right? So that's a wireless transmission. So if you think about another use case, for example, let's take a look at what happens when you, like all the 5G base stations I spoke about. This could be even for a communication network, let's say, which is being used by defense. It could be things like, let's say that you have a drone, a surveillance drone, which is kind of mapping out the terrain as it goes. And let's say you need extremely high, long amounts of range. Let's say you're recording video, you want to transmit all of that back to base. So you want a very high, long range. Let's say you want 200 kilometers of range. Right, and you want to transmit a signal back, right? So, or you want to communicate with a satellite. That's kind of
they're called what, high altitude pseudo satellites.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So primarily those kind of use cases. And so what are you doing there? You're trying to let's say compress video and then transmit that video as a signal, a wireless signal. So in that transmitter, the power amplifier is still is moving towards gallium nitride. So again, you take a bunch of examples. So again, if you think about what happens at a drone, right? This is actually a good scenario to think about.
Please break it down.
So as a let's say a power amplifier is probably a very power hungry component on the drone. So you need this to be extremely kind of efficient. So on a drone, you quite often also don't have the luxury of having a power source. If you do, it's a limited power source. So you need all of these components to be efficient.
It's the battery.
Right? So
it's the battery.
Yeah, it's usually a battery, and there are some, of course, which also have its own internal power source. Right? It could be a small engine or something. But you need all the electronics to be extremely efficient. And let's say you have
high heat, wind, whatever that will affect their materials there.
It will. Yeah, absolutely. And then it's also about you're powering a certain amount of wireless system, which is going to transmit a signal. So those power amplifiers also better be efficient. Right, because they're frequently what is consuming most of the power, right? So you need it to be efficient. So that's number one. So number two is they're on drone. You don't have a lot of space, so you need it to be compact. Number three is you need like extremely high ranges. Let's say like we've been talking about. So you need extremely high powers, right? And you also need a reasonable amount of bandwidth for all of this. So let's say you want to move higher and higher in frequency. So now if you break down the requirements of your power amplifier, you need something that's very efficient. You need something that's very compact. You need something that can handle very high amounts of power and work at a higher frequency. And all of this without a trade-offs. So you can't trade off size with efficiency or something. You need all four, right?
Because it's not a consumer play.
Yeah, it's not a consumer.
It's national defense.
Exactly. So therefore, what is the solution, semiconductor solution that does all four of these things in one go? That's gallium nitride for you, right? As a power amplification element. All the other control electronics around it, by the way, the stuff that's doing all the kind of information processing, right? So computation, memory, all of that stuff, control circuitry, all of this can still remain on silicon. Right, so it's not handling powers, right? So and silicon is much better suited to doing all of those things, but the power amplification can happen on gallium nitride.
Okay, the couple of beautifully explained and couple of thoughts when you took this to market. You've made a very good point earlier over a cup of coffee. You said capital chases good companies, but that was something that didn't happen to you. It took time, although the team had a great pedigree of science, patents. There was a method to the madness. How did you solve that? This explanation is so simple and beautiful. You've explained to me how a drone works and how we can separate silicon and power amplification with gallium nitride. I think that was essential, and I'm sure that now people can understand that that everything is not software and services that the way we look at in India. So how did you convince the VCs, right? They have in India, I think, only after 2023 has the deep tech narrative suddenly become a very important strategic narrative for geopolitical reasons. One is the timing. Second is, how did you convince these guys that, look, this is the way forward? Because then they have to understand materials. Where does gallium nitride come from? Then the fact that it has to go to market. Let's try to answer these questions.
Sure. So I think convincing these guys, as you put it, is only only half of it is in your hands. So people also need to do the work to kind of understand this, and we were lucky in that sense. So if you look at Agnit today, we've started out, our go-to-market has been to make semiconductor solutions and products, mainly for the defense market to start out with. Yes. There are, of course, no doubt civilian use cases for this technology, which I've kind of spoken about briefly, right? Happy to go into it.
Yeah, we'll go in depth in a bit.
But so our starting point was this, and the reason we chose this was very simple. It's because, firstly, there is a need for this particular technology in this particular sector at this moment in time. Right, given everything that's going on. So whether it's the global geopolitical scenario, whether it's supply chain issues, and more importantly, you have a whole host of Indian companies now standing up and saying that, look, in addition to doing, we've always been good at semiconductors as a country, right? But primarily from a services angle, right? So now a lot of Indian companies are also saying, why don't we own some of this IP? Right, and in Agnit's case, this IP is not just design IP; it's also some amount of manufacturing IP.
Yeah,
right? So
that's manufacture the wafer, design the wafer.
Absolutely, yeah. We make our own gallium nitride material. That's why we start. We make the wafers. We process it, and it goes through hundreds of steps of semiconductor manufacturing
and the
process.
Chip itself.
And we make the chip itself, which is the product that somebody sees from us, right? So
which they can deploy onto their product.
Exactly, right. So we are vertically integrated in that sense. So we go from materials to process to the chips that people actually encounter. So that's Agnit. That's the Agnit story in a nutshell. Yes. That's the technology.
So they got that,
right? So of course they got that, and we are quite lucky. And given that we decided to target the strategic market, because initially you want to be in a market where the customer pain point is most severe. So to put it very simply, right? So and
because
in this particular
national
case,
security.
Yeah, it is, and it's gallium nitride is also restricted technology. So and not too many countries have the expertise to actually produce these sort of chips, right? And so if that is the case, and then your own defense forces needs that. Given there's a strong push, especially towards indigenization of systems. The one thing where it is not it's percolating into now is also the semiconductors that go into the systems, right? So programs like IDEX, etc., have been enormously successful in delivering systems and solutions to people.
So you want to explain that it's not coming to semiconductors that go into certain devices. You want to talk about that?
Sure. There is gallium nitride is restricted technology. So there's a lot of export control associated with this technology.
Right.
It's also on, so it's, for example, the simple way to explain it to be, you could probably go to, let's say, a company, Western company, and they could sell you a radar, next generation radar, full radar, which has gallium nitride in it. But let's say you want to develop your own next generation radar, then getting access to the right kind of gallium nitride components is, very difficult at the moment, right? So that's the scenario, to put it very simply. Now, if you say that our, stated goal is to actually have Indian companies start producing systems, defense systems of caliber, and not just for serving Indian needs, but also for export markets, and also have them be world class, then you better have access to semiconductor technology that enables all of this.
So that's the broken ecosystem that I want to get into.
Sure.
That's a very important component. Quickly, if you can finish off that they got this, the fact that the VCs got this, they invested with you.
Yeah.
And the reason they did it is because there was a ready market.
Absolutely. There was a ready market. And I think that, it's also, a matter of some pride for us that, we have the investors that we have. Because we were targeting an Indian market. So it's good to have the backing of India-based funds and VCs to actually support this particular effort, because they got what we were trying to do. Right. So I think that is something that we quite value. And both 314 and Zephyr also did their own due diligence and really got into the weeds in terms of technology, markets, potential for commercialization, where is it headed, right? And so that's something that they were willing to put in a lot of effort even at their end to try and understand.
Did they also want you to move the consumer side at some point?
Yeah, I think that this technology
that's another broken supply piece.
Correct.
We talk about it. So what did they say?
Yeah. So absolutely, I think that the commercial implications of this technology, especially on consumer side, is very clear and present, right?
Okay.
So I think that there is always the need to kind of diversify beyond the strategic use cases, because at the end of the day, technology also finds a slightly larger home. If you think about it, right? So it's very important that is done.
Okay.
And that's very much what we intend to do as well.
Okay. Looking forward to that. Okay, let's now break down the components. When I say components, the pieces in the industry that are required for you to be a complete integrated player from the semiconductor perspective. You're right. Today we have end systems, which probably are imported, maybe, right, in many ways, and there's no equivalent of Indian manufacturers within, or maybe broken. You said we have some semblance of an ecosystem, but not completely. Where do we begin there? If the customer has to understand the need of the hour, because in the end, why are we doing this? We want people to go and say, hey, we have somebody called Dr. Hareesh who's doing this gallium nitride thing, but he needs the support. These are the components that are required for the final ecosystem to come together. It's a long process.
Yeah.
We're also going to talk about 3 waves of semiconductors in India. It's finally taking some sort of shape, saying, hey, we need to do this. So if you can explain, how do we build this ecosystem?
Sure.
Just from a good Samaritan perspective, right? What do you think will help your company's growth?
Sure. I'll talk about it from a very narrow Agnit lens.
Yes, please.
So
yes, I wanted to be that. Yes.
Yeah. So for example, today let's take the example of let's say a consumer fast charger. Let's say you want to build a
consumer fast charger.
Let's say you want to build a consumer fast charger. That's the system that a consumer buys.
Okay.
Right? So
it could be for your EV cars.
It could be for your cars. It could be for your 2-wheelers primarily, or it could be for, let's say, even your laptops, or let's say high power chargers. Right, so let's say that's the product. Okay, then let's say somebody is there, assembling that product, putting a logo on it, their logo on it, right? So that's probably the final system maker, right? So, and it's not just one component that goes into it. There's a bunch of subsystems that go into it, right? So you need people making subsystems. So in this particular case, the subsystem could be, let's say the full power converter that actually converts the power. So you take it back one step, and there could be a module that goes into this subsystem.
Yeah, no,
right?
Again.
And let's say that that is not just the semiconductor chip; it's semiconductor chips with some peripherals and control circuitry.
And these are the.
And then you have the people.
These are the subsystems.
These are the subsystems, and then you have the people who are making the semiconductors itself. So somebody like an Agnit who is making a gallium nitride component, right? So that's sort of the value chain. So you go from a semiconductor component to a module to a subsystem to a system. Right. So pieces of this value chain, especially in the consumer space, already exists, right? But it's not as if we have all the pieces of the puzzle figured out.
Okay.
Right. So maybe you have an Agnit which is starting out here. We need many more Agnits. That's another thing to think about. We also need the final end system itself that we are making today, right? So that's something that we do have some expertise in. Given that we
have the IP.
We have the IP in doing that, but we also need to fill up the gaps.
Okay, and those gaps.
So how do you take, let's say, an indigenous semiconductor gallium nitride component into a final system?
Yes, and
so
the final system, let's say a transmitter. A radar ecosystem.
Correct.
Or an EV charger.
Or an EV charger for that matter, right? So if you say an EV charger, then essentially you'd have to put it into a module.
Yes.
Right. So and then that module needs to go into some kind of a power converter, which could be a subsystem. And then that subsystem then gets integrated into the final charger as well.
Wow, and most of it is imported?
Yeah, I think most of it is imported today. So, there are, one of the things is, of course, in terms of where is the electronics sourced from. I think most of the electronics is sourced from somewhere else. But it's good that we are as a country, we are building in, some amount of IP ownership there, which is still happening, early days, but, still something hopefully that will just expand. And then, you even take it one step backwards and then say, okay, some part of this can I make in-house? Where it makes sense to make it in-house. It doesn't make sense to, kind of produce every single chip in the country, right? But you should identify what are maybe high value addition items on your BOM, and then see how you can make them.
BOM, bill of materials.
Bill of materials, yes. and then see how you can make them, right? So that's probably a more productive strategy.
And today we stand to lose because we stand to lose because of what? In terms of employment, in terms of the cost we pay, in terms of importing these materials quite high. Right, and that's the problem.
That's true. I think that our electronics import bill is comparable to our oil import bill, if not higher.
Yes,
right.
I've heard, yes.
Yeah, so that's something that needs to be addressed. But again, it doesn't also, you can't take a sledgehammer to this problem. Right? It needs to be targeted.
You can't brute force.
You can't brute force it. You can't make everything. No country today in the world is actually self-sufficient in terms of semiconductor manufacturing. Right. So, that's a very tall claim. This is necessarily a globally integrated expertise. But there could be pockets of excellence that we can promote. right? So whether it
Like
could
those
be
modules, subsystem modules.
yeah, like it could be modules, it could be subsystems, it could be where we as a country own the semiconductor IP and can make not just a national impact but also a global impact, right? So given that in some of these use cases they're just up and coming, right?
Okay.
So and it'll be it'll take about 5, 7, 10 years for it to fully play out, right? So for adoption.
So this EV module that goes onto the wall in a hotel or a home.
Yeah.
So the subsystems there can be built here locally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Although you
and
have
if you
an
do that,
import
you
of
don't
a
just
few
have the Indian market, right? So let's say you are able to standardize a module, and let's say tomorrow EV chargers. I don't know what is the current standard that they run on. I believe there are two types of charging ports, etc.
Yeah, there are two different. I have a EV, so that all of them are fighting with each other on the standards. Yes.
So let's say it's one standard could be established, or let's say even two standards, right? And they could be adopted globally.
But I heard
Right,
for the
so-
two-wheelers it's standardized now, but not for the four-wheelers for sure.
Got it. Okay.
So it's an interesting time.
It is an interesting time, right? So how do you drive standardization of some of these things, right?
Okay.
And necessarily to drive standardization, you also need the ecosystem backwards. You also need access to semiconductors to say
Yes.
that, look, if I'm going to standardize this, I better have access to some amount of cutting edge technology
Yeah.
based on which I can develop a standard which can then be globally adopted, right?
Okay.
So that's the longer term
Vision.
yeah. So,
Okay,
but
let's
yeah.
see how it plays out.
Yeah.
With whatever you've told me, being a common man and with little understanding of science, but obviously an user of that science, I'm feeling very grateful that finally there are entrepreneurs who are coming back from the West, and you could have stayed there and you could have done your PhD, continue to do more postdoctoral studies there, and probably earned a lot more money. I want to talk about the risk that you took. Why did you take that risk? I mean, and your father's also an engineer. I mean, an employee, but at a very respected PSU. When you took up this entrepreneurship journey, was it easy to convince family people?
When we started, there was no, startups weren't cool.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So,
And ISC startups are not known for their marketing.
Right.
Seriously. And let me put it out there. I hope they do more. Huh? And I want them to do more. Come talk to me.
Absolutely.
So how did it happen for you in terms of convincing yourself that I'm going to come talk about this, I'm going to go build this? How did that happen for you?
I think a few different motivations, right? One is, of course, the team was great. So I knew my
Yeah, we
co-founders
spoke
for
about
many
the
years, before we even did this venture. So, and, I frequently tell people that I would trust most of them with my life, right? So, and I have trusted them with my career in some sense, right? So, I think that level of trust was that really helps. It's very important.
And ISC obviously
And
giving
of
you
course,
that great
ISC,
ecosystem.
absolutely. It's a fantastic ecosystem for anybody trying to do any kind of deep tech innovation, especially, right? And especially with ours. And with ISC also, a lot of the baseline technology actually comes from ISC. So they held a lot of the patents which they very, generously licensed to us. And that's how we could
That's
get,
the
that's
sweet
how we
part
could
of
get going.
ISC.
And it's nice that we could, try and commercialize a lot of the IP that universities normally, tend to kind of
that's the
file away.
motive.
Right? So that's really the motive.
Did
And,
your father agree to this?
Actually, he didn't have a problem at all. So,
that's nice.
Yeah. So he has always been very encouraging of anything that I do. I think the only thing he told me was, look, you probably only live once, right?
Yes, try it out.
Yeah,
That's good of it.
We may all believe in rebirth, but that's a different story.
Here's a quick fact, okay?
So-
Did you know I was in the ISC for 14 years?
I didn't know that.
You know why the science rubbed off on me? I used to play only cricket there. There are a lot of good cricket camps in the ISC. Did you know that? I don't know now. They have a beautiful stadium.
Yeah. The
Right?
Gymkhana,
That
yeah.
same Gymkhana,
Yeah.
I was there for 14 years.
Oh, very nice.
And
Okay.
guess who would be our we'd play practice games against ISC.
I see.
That's how I'd meet all the scientists and
I
talk
see.
all this
Oh, nice.
cool tech.
Okay.
And I'm so glad back then they were just PhD guys, hardcore PhD guys who loved to create patents, who would love to write papers, but then they would just recline back. Not their fault, because there was nothing showing them what has happened after 2023. We talked about the funds. Is it also because the government wants this done?
I think it actually predates 2023, right? I think all this goes back to the whole, Make in India, Startup India, Stand Up India.
2014
All this
onwards, yeah.
wasn't a thing when I even joined for my PhD way back in 2009.
Yes.
So nobody was talking about startup. It
Yes.
was not cool, right? But
Not cool
as
at all, absolutely.
Yeah, and especially in the deep tech space, there's something that you mentioned previously as well. So we have like excellent amount of IP. Sitting with universities, not just ISC, with practically every university. You can look at any IITs. I think the research is world class, right? So we have missed that kind of, what takes that to commercialization. You need some kind of a, like an entrepreneurial ecosystem that does that, right? And we didn't have that, as a country, right? So, and then, you had the whole, Startup India thing pick up, and then people were a lot more, kind of welcoming and understanding of startups. And there have been serious policy changes on the ground, which you can see, right? Every entrepreneur today probably sees it. And if you then look at the semiconductor sector, we've had things like ISM happen, right, over the last couple of years, which has been again very, very good for the ecosystem in general, right? Because this is a long-term game. So you can't promote semiconductor policies for 2 or 3 years and then take your foot off the pedal. This is something that needs to happen over 10 years, right? If you are serious about being part of the global semiconductor value chain, right? And in the design space, India has always been part of the global semiconductor value chain.
I agree.
But IP ownership needs to be promoted.
So we were always in the IC design ecosystem.
Correct. It's a IC design ecosystem, and primarily, historically, if you go back and look at it, there were all these global companies setting up design centers here in the country.
Yeah.
So it was also a services-driven, IC design ecosystem. Right. So now you have Indian companies saying that, look, I don't want to just do this for somebody else. I want to own the IP.
Wow.
Right. And then license it or try to make this into a product.
You make so much more money.
Absolutely. And so that's your progression of the value chain, right? So that's where we are today. And hopefully a lot more of these efforts we'll have more fabless companies. We'll have more companies like Agnit, which are trying to be, integrated device manufacturers. You'll have the whole ecosystem.
And the reason of promoting this podcast is also to get people to know that a semiconductor company, various companies, it's not just a chip. When they talk foundries, and they talk, the Taiwanese company, they talk about, when Trump comes up and says, these are chip manufacturers who are coming back, there's a reason he's saying that. I want you to explain why it's just beyond chip. It's not just the chip that makes anything in the, it's obviously India has the brains. But you were right, we need the PhD, we're going to talk about it. What is the semiconductor kind of talent ecosystem that we need, along with a plant or a foundry and somebody who manages and the technologies that are going? Can you give us a quick thought on that?
Sure. So if you look at what happens in any, let's take a semiconductor manufacturing plant, a foundry, and then see what kind of the inputs are, right? So of course, on one hand, you have all the other inputs that you need to run that facility, right? So you have all the water, electricity, all the other needs that you have, chemicals. The resources, the chemicals, which are all semiconductor grade.
So energy, water, chemicals.
So those are primary ones. Then let's say that you want to outfit your fab, you need to set up all the utilities, the infrastructure that actually goes into making a foundry. We've all seen the videos of like robot wafer carriers.
They're all on YouTube. You can check them out.
Absolutely. So you need all of that to be set up. You need it to be designed. You need it to be set up.
The factory to be designed.
Yeah, the factory to be designed. Yes. Yeah, the whole thing to be set up, and of course integrated seamlessly with all the utilities that we spoke about. Then of course, in terms of what is it that you'll outfit the factory with? You'll need all these equipment that goes on here. And then there are these both global companies that make semiconductor equipment, and then you also have people who make spares for that equipment.
And these are expensive.
Right? And these are extremely expensive, so some of them could cost, close to $100 million, if not more.
Right?
For a single piece of equipment.
And the team that comes with it.
And the team that comes with it. So you need a team to maintain it, you need a team to install and commission it, right? So which probably the tool vendor will help you out with.
This is so
but then you also need to develop your manufacturing process on it. And then you need, then comes the question of, okay, you have all of this, what are you going to produce on it?
Yeah. Right? So, I was coming to that. Are you making a chip for a smartphone?
Exactly. So, then the question is, where does that design come in for that? And let's say the design comes in, then, do you have the manufacturing process which is capable of producing that?
That's the technology. Industry.
For that particular chip, for that particular use case, by that particular customer. Right. So, and of course, you would like to make sure that, things are as universal as possible across use cases, but frequently it's not the case. So, then you need all the technology inputs that come into this, apart from all the raw material inputs. Then you need the trained manpower, which can not just design, but also run the fab, maintain the utilities, and also diversify across your supply chain. Let's say you need ultra pure gases, you need ultra pure chemicals, right? So you also need the whole ecosystem to be set up. It's kind of like what happened in India with the pharma ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not just about setting up the pharma, and knowing how to make a molecule. It's also about how do you scale it up.
India did well there.
Yeah, India did well there, right? So and of course, so semiconductor grade manufacturing requires probably chemicals of a much more stringent input. Not probably, it does. And and all the technology inputs that go into this, right? So it is a industry like in and of itself. It's a very complex industry, right? So
one company cannot do it.
Absolutely not, and one company does not do it even globally, right? So you have.
So if you look at TSMC, the Taiwanese company, they build only wafers. That is their expertise, correct? Mm-hmm. And then the integration with other things like you mentioned, the use cases.
So they have their own local ecosystem, specifically in Taiwan. We'll see how this. Yeah, they've created it over many years. And of course, a lot of fabless companies, for example, in NVIDIA, could send a design to TSMC and make it. So TSMC doesn't intentionally venture into the design part of it. So they focus on manufacturing where they're very
So
good
they'll let the IP for someone else.
Exactly.
Yes.
And not does TSMC venture into making its own tools.
So should India
Right, so-
own the IP? Now that you said a lot of entrepreneurs like you are getting into the IP side of things,
Yeah.
but we should get into the manufacturing for the use case.
We should definitely do both. It's not one or the other. So we should definitely own design IP as much as possible because it's kind of if you can leverage external foundries and external fabs, it's it's a very kind of a smoother path probably to do that, right? So in terms of developing IP, whatever passes for a smooth path in the semiconductor kind of business. But in certain use cases, it's also useful to have the manufacturing in-house, right? And this is on a case-by-case, technology-by-technology sort of a basis that you should take this call.
Okay.
Right. So and
Where do
then
we
also
stand in India today in
Right.
this case?
So we've historically been very strong in terms of silicon based design IP, right? So whether it's and there are a lot of companies which now own IP for a lot of these use cases. It could be telecommunications, it could be computation. Hopefully we'll see some more companies coming up with like AI accelerated chips, all designed out of India. So that'll be very nice. So that's one part. That's on the design piece of things. In terms of manufacturing, of course, you have companies now. You have large plants in the country which are manufacturing things like solar cells.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So, for example, that's a semiconductor, right? So,
on the solar side, we have manufacturing.
Correct. We do have manufacturers, right? So, what we are trying to do is to make sure, as part of our journey in Agnit, to make sure that we have a gallium nitride technology source, for the country.
Factories can use gallium nitride, no?
Correct. The factories can use gallium nitride. I think it's all the production technology, all the design that we spoke about, plus the IP for all the manufacturing, the production grade IP, that takes to run on those tools. So that's something that we are doing. You also need people who will design tools that can go into fabs, right? So you also need people who will design, a lot of the chemical ecosystem exists in the country. But how do you make sure they're designing semiconductor grade chemicals, developing semiconductor grade chemicals that can then go in? A lot of these chemicals are things like 6979 pure, right? So that's 99.99999% pure, right? So you need to design, you need to develop chemicals to that particular extent as well. So that supply chain also needs to come up. So it's a lot of work actually.
It's a lot of work. And how do you feel the answers are being, brought to the table, saying a bunch of people coming together and talking the same thing? I mean, from your perspective as a young startup, you have so much to say that this is what we need. But are we a broken ecosystem still? Because I'll tell you why. A lot of people argue that, okay, we're a globalized world, let's not do what we just spoke about. But you're right, we need to do it for strategic reasons. And we're a large market. And today we can already see what tariffs can do to a country. Just a simple example. For example, guitars. I love music. So guitars are made in Indonesia, China, and it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
And the tariffs will destroy that industry, right? But the interesting piece is maybe the guitars from Indonesia won't go out of fashion because the US has outsourced its wood. I mean, the timber, most of the timber comes from Indonesia now.
Oh, I see.
So they're a better partner to them than China. So the guitars from Indonesia maybe will. So it's an interesting geopolitical space to be part of.
It is, yeah.
Are there people coming on the table, and whenever you go to forums, do people talk the same language? How difficult is it? I've told you why I lost interest in semiconductors in between because I covered it in 4 and 8. Then it was all about these big plays that India has to do everything, but that would get smothered. And said, no, why should we even do it? It's too complex. But then there's the 2014 race that started where it said, look, we are going to own the IP. We're going to start somewhere. And we've got there. It's been 10 years. And now in the third wave, where people are saying we need to balance this. Are people really interested?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are really interested. And I think that the fundamental philosophy is the fact that now we have to own the IP. I think if you look at it from that lens, right? So a lot of efforts
start from there, you're saying.
Start from that lens. So if you start from that lens, a lot of efforts will make sense. So a lot of fabless efforts will make sense, right? So because you're then talking about IP ownership, and then efforts like ours will start making sense because for a particular market and for a particular set of use cases, this technology is going to be around for the next, let's say, 10-12 years, right? So it makes sense if you have, let's say, a credible technology play in this area. It makes sense. It's an interesting thing to do, right? And so that's in terms of gallium nitride. So it makes sense to also develop, if you look at it from the lens of trying to own IP and then build solutions in the country, not just for the country, but also global solutions in the country. It makes sense. You can't do everything yourself. So that is absolutely correct, right? So you can't, again, like I said earlier, you can't take a sledgehammer to this problem and say, I will do the whole thing, right? So I will. So you can't do that. So what you have to do is focus on things that you already have some level of competence in, and where you as a country, when I say competence, you have some IP competence.
We do, which we do.
And also efforts that can probably, are a bit more tractable when we start out with, right? So what I mean by that is today, if you were to set up, the cutting edge silicon fab in the country. So apart from all the capital expenses, you also need a bunch of trained manpower which can then run that particular fab for you, right? So are we there today? I don't know, right? So and of course, then the question is, if you were to do something else in some other space, is it easier? So maybe you need lesser number of people. Maybe you need, slightly different profile of people, which you will probably find in the ecosystem in some way, right? And especially your other point about, India itself being a large market. So if we can initially make solutions for our own end customers at the end of the day, so isn't that a little bit more tractable, right?
It is tractable.
So that's something, and everybody's answers will be different in this space, right? So these are some things that these are all questions that we have wrestled with. So this is our limited answer, given that we are all heavily biased and been working on this technology for a while. So that's the answer that we come up with. Everybody's answers will definitely be different.
Hopefully we are in the right direction. Though.
Hopefully we are. But this lens is very important. So it's to frame that you own as much of the IP as possible. And I think it's high time that we started doing.
Okay. Yeah. For this IP to grow.
Yeah.
And the fact that you gave us the ecosystem, and you made a very valid point saying for all this we need very good PhDs, not just PhDs, but people who understand why they've done a PhD, right? And you said that India has a very good science background, but obviously last 30 years, a lot of the PhDs would have also gone into software as a line, right? Especially from the material sciences perspective, do you think we need universities now say, look, let's just start focusing on the deep tech industry? And it's a flavor of the season. Every newspaper and magazine or even the digital publications are talking about it.
Yes.
How should we solve the PhD problem?
Okay. We definitely need, I think it's about, if you look at what has happened with other industries, right? So it's a concentration of talent thing, right?
Very
so
much.
people quite tell you that whether it's even doing things like, let's say, contract research for pharma, right? So the concentration of talent that you will get in India is probably not available elsewhere, right? And it's taken us some time to get to that point, right? So something similar needs to happen even on the semiconductor ecosystem. It's not like you're going to find trained people on day one. It's not going to happen. Right, so you have an option. So I think it needs to be a mix of people who will, kind of are willing to relocate to the country, given the experiences that they've had.
Are there many Indians out?
There are quite a few, right? So quite a few, especially working in high technology areas like ours, right? So and in other countries, right? So that's something that So and now people are now looking at the India semiconductor story and then saying, hey, what role can I play here?
Okay.
Right, so we need a lot more of those people. So it's going to be a combination of not just homegrown talent, but also people who are willing to move back, relocate, and try and see how they can contribute to the India semiconductor story.
Okay.
Right, so that's a viable way of doing it. Are you going to be able to find 1,000 PhDs in year one to do this? Probably not. But to work your way there. So which means that it's also important to select the kind of problems that you will work on starting in year 1 to year 5, let's say.
Okay.
And be a little bit pragmatic about it.
The universities have to be pragmatic. I mean,
No, I think the companies that
also
are trying to do commercialization efforts need to be a lot more pragmatic. And so I think the universities, of course, need to kind of see if there can be dedicated programs run in semiconductor, especially in terms of manufacturing, in terms of design. I think in design, in VLSI design, we've already had this ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of that is actually paying out now.
Can they progress to this?
Yeah, sure.
Sure,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
In the design space, yeah, absolutely. So not all design is, don't want to paint it with too broad a brush. So not all design is the same. But definitely having, let's say, a huge VLSI design ecosystem helps with other kinds of design as well.
Okay.
Right. So it's definitely helpful.
Okay.
And you of course need this. So this pipeline needs to be built over the next 5-6
Correct.
years.
So one is the geographical shift from, the Indians who are there should come back. That itself is a story.
Yeah.
Then the fact that companies should
I wouldn't say should. It'll be nice if they come back.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people do see the potential.
There is a trend though.
So yes, there is a trend, and it's does the India semiconductor story have legs?
Yes, it should have legs. The point is people are coming, but because I'll tell you, I'll give you now. I spoke to the founders of Ambi. I spoke to the founders of Oculo. Then the VCAT. It's a bio in the pharma space. So, and people are coming back.
Yeah.
Most of them are PhDs.
Yeah.
But it's essential to have legs, and the legs are support from industry.
Correct. Sustained policy, support from the government.
And the universities, enabling the research with industry.
Correct.
Right?
That's true.
So it's a combination. So IISc has done a fantastic job there so far.
Yeah.
Do you need many more universities like an IISc that can do this from the electronics perspective?
Absolutely.
Because you know, material sciences, electronics, and much more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think every single university should be looking at this
As an opportunity.
As an opportunity. right? So and not just in terms of the IP generation at the level of universities, also in terms of skilling.
Right.
So
Like you went from an MS Ramaya to ISC.
Yeah.
And then from there on to PhD in the UK and the USA. And you've done PhDs quite early, you're still young in your life, then, I mean, that's something that they can enable.
Yeah,
you did
absolutely.
it out of self-interest, but that's something that the ecosystem can enable, right?
Absolutely. I think it could be great if there is, in this particular industry, at least we need a little bit more volume in terms of, the kind of PhDs and masters that people are doing. But I think it's also a function of how the market dynamics are. So you'll find that more universities will launch programs in semiconductors if there is a strong interest.
Correct.
Especially from candidates, and there'll be a strong interest in candidates if their parents are convinced that there is a semiconductor industry in the country,
career.
right? So there's a career here, a long-term career here, right? So I think that's something that we will probably see. We already see it to some extent, right? A lot of universities have launched new programs, but we need a lot more to come.
Okay.
There'll of course be short-term hiccups, but over the long term, I think that the India semiconductor story is here to stay.
Okay, I'm glad we spoke ecosystem. We spoke funding, we spoke science, we spoke talent, and we spoke about your founders. I want to talk about ancillary services and functions. One is you worked with BCL for a while now. Why do you need firms like us helping you? In what sense? And why is it important for a startup?
I think for any startup, you need to move from a phase where you are sort of person-driven to being more process-driven, if that makes sense, right?
It makes sense, yes.
So initially, when you start out, you're practically doing everything by yourself,
Yes.
right? So in however of it could be things where you are not really the most capable person of doing, but you're probably the only person doing it.
Correct.
So you have to do it. Right, so a lot of the, especially things like the finance function, accounting function, compliances, all of this also needs to be a lot more process-driven as you grow as a country.
Because you're going to raise more money.
Yeah, you're going to raise more money. You're also going to become a larger organization, so your touch points with the universe sort of expands, right? So you need to make sure all of those are also managed properly, right?
It's interesting, right? I mean, India today, the ecosystem is so. I mean, I think there's an ecosystem that helps you. In the old days, a founder would take. That's why you find people who are probably a couple of generations older than us trying to control every aspect of the business. It need not be so anymore. Correct? Is it that true?
Absolutely.
And it gives you time to sell the science and focus on the science.
Yeah.
And not be individual about everything, saying, hey, my HR, payroll, or compliance. You have different streams of leaders doing it and working with ancillary firms. That's the
correct. Absolutely.
That's the future.
Yeah, that is the future. And the quicker that you can make that transition, I think the better it'll help you, because as a founder, you're probably good at developing products.
Yes.
And getting customers, and taking your product out into the market. So that commercialization journey is very important for a founder.
Okay.
So anything that you don't spend doing that is taking energy away from you, right?
Okay. You've raised quite a big seed. Yeah, and that seed 10 years ago, would have gone into a consumer company, and I'm so glad. Can I mention the number? Is that
please?
Public?
It's a public record.
It's about 3.5 million. That would have gone into a young consumer startup. But I'm so glad that money has come into a deep tech company. Now, the second round for me as a journalist, my 20 years, the series from B to C and onwards has been with the consumer companies. But if you look at San Francisco and the Valley and LA and those regions and Boston and those regions, you see that young companies like Intel, those days, the 50s, have grown because the VC ecosystem is built in Intel, right? Or built companies like an NVIDIA, for example. NVIDIA has been around for what? Nobody realizes, 30 years now, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's only now that they are what they are. And a lot of people, and obviously everyone gets a Tesla moment because it was the narrative, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that he's such a flamboyant entrepreneur. But NVIDIA thing took time. So that's how companies get built. So what is the challenge for you in terms of going from 3 to a 30 or a 90 million, for example, for the technology? Do you have to go globally, meet people? Is that something? IDEX grants are great. But now you also said that gallium nitride is also confined to India in terms of exporting and all that. How do you gaze that future and also say that I am going to raise a lot of money for this?
Sure. I think if you just look at the fundamental technology premise that we are solving for, so gallium nitride is a global market. There are
so you are allowed to export.
So we are, of course, yeah. So we are. So it's a global market. So the question is, what kind of solutions? We are focused on the Indian market to make sure that we have solutions in the market
for the strategic market.
So
yes.
Not just for the strategic market, but also for the consumer market.
Okay.
Yeah. So once you have those solutions, then it kind of changes the conversation a bit, right? So you can go and tell people that I don't have this cool prototype. I have products in the field that are working. and that really changes
That changes the
conversation,
narrative,
right?
yes.
So that's what we are engaged on. So why is it that you want to do this in India? It's because your customers are here, so you get much tighter
this
feedback.
point of time, yes.
Right. So your feedback loop is a lot more controlled
Correct.
and tighter.
Correct.
Right. So you could ship somebody a product, they could test it, get you feedback in a week's time. Right. And you also need to think about what is the other geographies you'll expand.
Correct. That was
right?
my
So
question.
if you start targeting the Western geographies, then your product already needs to be in a certain state of maturity before you can go and have that, because they do have some experience in working with the technology
Yes.
already, right? So then the question is going to be more about along the lines of, okay, so what is the kind of technology differentiator? What is the kind of cost differentiator? What's the kind of service differentiator, if you will? So you'll probably focus a little bit more on these three verticals, right? But it's difficult to have that conversation without having something which is already deployed. So once you have solutions that are deployed, then you can go and tell people that, look, hey, I have 2 products already out in the field working for 1 million hours, nothing's happened yet, right?
Okay.
So that really changes the name of the game.
Right.
And again, very, very market driven sort of a thing,
Yeah.
right? So
No, look forward to more raises from you, and because that's what the young person today looks at, and it's unfortunate, but I really want a company like Agnit to survive in the long run, and it'll be a disappointment, for the ecosystem to lose good PhDs to things that consumer sciences or whatever, right? The reason I say it is, guys, this is the reason we didn't talk about AI so far. This is an AI proof company, right? So an AI proof, because probably you can use AI in the material sciences. That's it, right? The IP
Sure.
is human driven. Correct?
Sure. Probably also to some extent in the design process. But yeah, I think that
AI is an enabler. Truly,
it is a true enabler, and I think we are still waiting to see exactly how it will enable certain things in our industry, right? So, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
No, you're in the right frame of things, and I think you said 7 founders. So I hope, taking out a pop culture, Magnificent 7, if you've seen the movie, I hope it turns out like that and you surprise everybody. But I can't let you go. I need to ask you 2 more questions about books and people that inspired you.
Sure.
What are they?
Sure. So I am a little bit of a history buff, so
you told me.
I like reading about history, especially about Indian history.
Correct.
So I think the last history book that I read and enjoyed was Lords of the Earth and Sea. By
I haven't read.
City. Yeah, which is fantastic. His
It's
previous
the
book
second
was-
one, you said.
It's the second one. Yeah, I think his first book was Lords of the Deccan,
Yes.
which is again fantastic. So it's that period in history which kind of tends to get 2 pages on a history textbook.
Okay.
Right. So I'm glad that there are more and more storytellers like him and historians like him
I
coming up with
agree.
these stories.
And it allows armchair historians like us to get a perspective of life,
Absolutely.
cultures, science,
Absolutely.
right? So those 2 books by Anirudh Kanisetti also,
Yep.
and Manu Pillai are the 2 historians that you like, you
Yeah,
said, right?
yeah.
Okay, I'm going to put those in the description.
Sure.
The second book was Lord of the Earth and Sea, right? Seriously, I mean, was there history on the Earth and Sea those days?
Yeah, it's about the Chola Empire. So
So you've gone deeper into that. Absolutely, they were seafarers, weren't they?
Correct, they were, but they were seafarers with a twist. So you'll have to read the book to find out what exactly he means
Okay,
by
I'm going
that.
to check that out for sure. And inspirations.
Yeah. Inspirations, yeah. So I have many people to actually, whom I've drawn inspiration from. I think always had the strong support of my family. So, and that's been one. And secondly, been incredibly lucky to be at the IISc ecosystem.
Yes,
Right, which
it's
is
a family,
fantastic.
right?
Yeah, and that's something that we've really, that has enabled us to be where we are today. And
So it's the people there.
Absolutely.
It's the
It's the people
talent.
there,
It's
yeah,
the science
yeah.
people there, the scientists.
Absolutely.
And I think ISC
And
still
my
has that
co-founders,
movement.
so my
Names, what are the names?
I'm the least experienced member of the founding team, so my co-founders, a big shout out to to Asu, to Mayank, to Digi, to Shankar, to Madhu, and most importantly Dr. Muralidharan, who's unfortunately not with us anymore. But he was really the rock on which Agnit was built, right? So
And I hope that rock becomes a mountain, and I hope you guys really rock the world. Thank you. And this is Agnit, guys, and let us know, send us more questions, and we'll get Dr. Hareesh to answer them. But again, so building an ecosystem takes time. Support him. If you want to meet him, he's an IISc,
yeah,
right? Go get all your, and if you're a PhD, go do something with your IP.
absolutely, yeah.
Scale it up.
Scale it up. First find some, get really good at something. So, which is what a PhD is supposed to do for you. And if it's a rare skill that can be monetized, that's fantastic, especially in the technology domain.
Thank you, Hareesh.
So, great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Pleasure talking.
Thank you.